Spider bite piercings, pros, cons, advantages, disadvantages. Also going to talk about what you should know beforehand, getting the piercing done, jewelry, also living with the piercing, aftercare, and what happens if you say, hey, I don't want these anymore, and take them out. Coming up next on Pros and Cons by Piercer, Season 2, Episode number 52. So you might want to stick around. For those that are new here at the Body Piercing and Tattooing channel, welcome to the channel. Hope you're finding the videos helpful and informative. But you might not know who I am. My name is DaVo. I'm a professional body piercer and have been since 1994. I own and operate the Axiom Body Piercing Studio, located right here in Des Moines, Iowa, inside Skin Kitchen Tattoo. The piercing we're going to talk about today is actually a piercing group or a lip piercing group called spider bites. And it's basically two piercings on either side of the lip. Usually this can be done initially with studs, and then rings can be worn in it later, or done with curved barbells with the purpose of just wearing rings in it, or circular, or what have you. Really common piercing, been around for a long time. I remember doing these as far back as like the 90s, early 90s, 94-ish. Close friend of mine, Paul Gray, was probably the first one that I did this on. Some people might know who he is because he was in this big band called Slipknot. It didn't really have a name. It was just kind of like, I want two lip piercings, and that's what we did. As the industry's progressed, we've come up with kind of code words or shorthand to describe certain piercings or groupings, and this is one of those. There's a number of bites, if you haven't noticed yet. So, one thing I always tell people is, if you want a grouping and you're not quite sure which one it is, just go in, talk to your piercer, explain where you want to be pierced, and they'll be happy to do those piercings for you. They're not going to make fun of you. They're not going to think you're foolish or new or a newbie or whatever. They're going to be happy that you're explaining exactly what you want. Because a lot of times I've had situations where we've gotten to the point of marking the piercings, and the person went, that's not what I wanted. So use your hands and your voices. Now, lip piercings date back. They're really predominant in tribal cultures in South America, Africa, even somewhat North America. It's a really common piercing that has been done throughout the world. Really didn't develop as a piercing thing, as far as a modern thing, until like the beginning of modern piercing, probably in the 80s. It's a pretty common piercing today, though. Now let's get into the pros, the advantages, the things that make you go, hey, I need this in my life. Starting with number one, this piercing or this grouping has a long history of healing. It is not experimental. It's not something that may work or may not work. They usually heal pretty well and pretty easily. Number two, symmetry. It kind of gives that kind of attention and symmetry of having two that match on one side of your mouth. It's very interesting to have it fit into the natural flow of the body. Number three, quick heal. Usually these heal out anywhere from 2 to 4 months. Everybody heals differently. You can have a longer healing period depending on how well you take care of it, how healthy you are. But usually these are pretty easy healing, pretty quick. Number four, has less contact with teeth, gums, and etc. than snake bites or other groupings. Since they're kind of located in one spot, we're not dealing with the differences in anatomy that you see in the mouth when you go from one side to the other. We're not symmetrical or perfectly matching on both sides. So a lot of times we're dealing with a situation where, to make it look straight, we're kind of having to position that piercing in an area that's going to be more likely to have contact with teeth, gums, and etc. Plus, since it's often one side, usually you're not going to have as much contact. Number five, can be added to other groupings. You can match this up with other groupings, I don't want to go through the number of different names for it, but you could do two more on a set of spider bites on the other side. You could do maybe some beauty marks to match it, or what looks really cool is two on each side and then a Medusa and a vertical labret, giving you that really broad look if you are going for that style. Before I move on to the cons, if you like this, please like it. If you'd like to see more of it, subscribe, hit that notification bell so that you're notified every single time we post something. If you have a question or you have something to add, please leave a comment. Now let's move on to the cons, the disadvantages, the things that make you go, no, I do not need that in my life. Nope. Rather not. Start with number one, the risk of damage to teeth, gums, and etc. Anytime you do multiple piercings in an area, if there are risks involved, like in this case to gums, teeth, and etc., then that is doubled because you have twice the jewelry, twice the contact. So do keep that in mind before getting it done. Number 2, placement and angle can limit the jewelry you can wear in it. Probably one of the most common things that comes up with this particular piercing is the person has gotten in and gotten 2 Labret studs. They've been done fairly low, actually even below that gum line, and they come in and they say they want to have a ring in it. Well, to put a ring in it, you have to have something that's long enough to wrap around the top of the lip. So you end up with this huge, and I mean huge, set of rings that are going to have constant contact with your front teeth or your side teeth or front teeth, I guess. Yeah, there's kind of, you could say. Anyway, they're going to have contact with stuff because the rings are so big and they're very uncomfortable. And that moves us on to number 3, swelling. Anytime you pierce the mouth, it tends to swell. Just like if you get punched in the mouth. Swelling can last anywhere from 3 to 5 days. It can be uncomfortable, can require longer jewelry than needed, and will require you to change your diet and etc. during the healing process, especially that first couple weeks. Number 4, a lot of people don't want to talk about this, but lip piercings are notorious for leaving slightly larger scarring or more noticeable scarring than other piercings. It really depends on a couple things. It depends on how long that piercing has been there and how long it's been abandoned. They will fade over time, but because they're on your mouth, they're right on your face, people notice them very rapidly, and they're not easy to cover up. So when you commit, this idea of, oh, it's just a piercing, I'll take it out, everything goes back to normal. Keep in mind with certain piercings, like lip piercings, that scar tissue can be very noticeable. So do take that into account before you get it done because it can affect your future in ways we'll get into later. The last one, number 5, this piercing can close quickly. Any piercing that's in the mouth or through the mouth or in the mouth general area, because you ingest so much stuff into that mouth, and a lot of it tends to be on the micropathogen level and might not be good for you. Your body tends to be on overdrive when it comes to healing. So it's not uncommon for you to have this piercing or this set of piercings for a long period of time, take it out for a couple days or a couple hours, and have problems getting the jewelry in. It's just part of the nature of oral piercings. Now, I know I'm going to get 800 comments that say, I left mine out for 15 years and it went right back in. You're the exception. Most people, that is not the case. Before we move on to what you should know beforehand, check out our merch store. The link is in the description. Lots of t-shirts and lots of fun stuff. Now, let's move on to what you should know before you get it done. The first thing, or consider, or what have you, you should find a piercer that's experienced with this piercing, professional, informative, and makes you feel comfortable. Also, there should be a consultation with that piercer that involves all the risks involved with the piercing, what it's going to take to heal it, any dietary changes, pretty much everything that's going to be involved with getting the piercing, having the piercing, healing the piercing, and then living with it. Now, I kind of alluded to this earlier. This piercing can affect employment. Depending on where you're at, depending on the career you choose, what part of the world you live in, etc., and actually what the demand is for the career that you've chosen, it can affect whether or not you can be hired. These things have kind of gone down a lot in the last, I'd say, decade or so as piercings have become more acceptable and more common. But this is one of those piercings that's still kind of considered out there and on the edge and not something everybody wants to, especially if you're the face of the company, they want to portray themselves as. Now, this is different. You may limit your choices, though, for a career options in the future. If you plan on going to a professional suit and tie, corporate, lawyer, doctor kind of situation, you may have to abandon these piercings, or even the scar tissue in the future could affect who will employ you. Biggest thing is your piercer should have experience with this piercing. They should have gone through a formal apprenticeship, checked out on the piercing, done a number of them supervised, and done a number on their own. This shouldn't be something that, Joe in the garage does for you. One thing you always want to talk about during the consultation is what your end goal is for jewelry. What kind of jewelry options do you want to have on this piercing? Do you want to wear rings? Do you want to wear studs? Do you want to wear both? It really dictates the angle that's going to work best with that jewelry and what you're going to be able to wear. As I mentioned earlier, if the piercing is done with a Labret stud and it's done deep into the mouth, you're going to have problems with finding a ring that fits over the lip and is going to feel comfortable. With circular jewelry, it usually ends up being a lot more comfortable and less problematic if it's more outside the mouth, if it's more at a vertical type angle. Think of a vertical Labret done in that style opposed to something that's straight through. Now, I'm not saying you can't switch from one to the other. However, it is going to be a little bit more contact with the ring with it all the way inside your mouth. But even if you're like, at the time, I want to start out with studs, but I want to switch out to rings, that placement needs to be as high up as possible. Otherwise, you're dealing with that huge ring thing. So discuss that with your piercer. I usually suggest doing it during the consultation, and just because we get wrapped up in conversation and everything else that goes on when we're piercing, when they mark it, ask them about it again. As far as jewelry that's common with this, either a ring, of course, is the old school way. Curved barbells, circular barbells have been used. Probably the most common is going to be a flat back Labret stud, and that is more for that straight angle. And maybe I didn't explain this as well. If you're doing it, let's say this is your lip. If you were doing it with a stud, you want it to be kind of like this. If your idea is that you eventually want to wear only rings in it, more of an angle like this is going to be better for keeping that ring away from your teeth, gums, and etc. It's more outside the mouth. So that's the type of jewelry options you have. Discuss that with the piercer. The thing with rings and circular jewelry is you are going to see a longer healing period. You are going to be more prone to problems because of the massive amount of movement and just the fact that they're larger. They move a lot. They get bumped a lot. They have a higher profile, so they're going to be more likely to cause issues than a straight stud-style piece of jewelry. Now, he's going to probably... you need to address or understand cross-contamination prevention. Talk to your piercer about this. Know what those things are. I'll go into it a little more detail when we talk about healing. But you should be aware of those things before you get the piercing done because it can affect things in your life. Now, another thing you need to consider is diet and swelling reduction. That means you're going to cut down your intake of tobacco, alcohol, cannabis, hot and spicy foods, things that are extremely warm in temperature, vaping, or anything that may agitate your mouth. This is not as much of a pain as, like, say, a tongue piercing. It's not as intrusive. However, you do need to kind of stick with bland foods at first and soft foods until you figure out what you can eat. If you kind of think about it, drinking and eating is going to be a little more complicated because one side of your mouth is going to be blocked by this jewelry. So take that all into consider, plan ahead, buy lots of stuff that you can keep in the fridge. So when you get done with the piercing, you just have to go home and have stuff on hand that's easy to eat. The next thing is aftercare product. Does your piercer supply aftercare? Do they sell it? What are you going to need? Where can you get it? It's a good idea to do that ahead of time just so you have it on hand. You're not running around all over town looking for this immediately after you got a piercing done. Lastly, regardless of the jewelry, you're probably going to need to downsize those shorter pieces of jewelry. I usually suggest doing that, especially with stud jewelry, within 4 to 6 weeks after the piercing is done. Now let's talk about the piercing experience itself. Of course, we go through a consultation and jewelry selection. Waiver, setup, disinfect the area. Depending on your end goal of jewelry with the placement, It really depends on what angle you're going to go at, if you're going to go straight in, if you're going to go at a slightly upward angle. If you're going with the straight angle, it definitely needs to be either below the gum line or above it. We want to avoid being right at the gum line, having that disc rubbing right against there, if at all possible. The placement is usually off to the side and parallel. Now, your lip isn't straight like this. It kind of curves upward, and it should kind of match that so it naturally flows to the body. Do take a look at it in a mirror. Always check piercings, markings before you get it done. Otherwise, you're going to end up with what you get. Now, if they're doing it more vertically, generally they'll mark the inside too. That inside should kind of be below the rougher area of your lip in the smooth area. Next, basically, I do these with forceps. I don't understand people that don't, but we won't get into that today. So usually what I'll do is clamp the area, line up the dots, make sure that everything matches, make sure the angle matches, and then inject a needle in and through. Now, if you're using threaded jewelry, then you use a guide pin. Basically, you push the needle out with, well, first you remove the forceps, or then you push the needle out with a guide pin. The jewelry usually threads right on the end of the guide pin. It goes back through, and then we close it up with either the barbell or whatever beautiful gem setting that you've chosen. Afterwards, you're going to probably notice a little bit of throbbing and aching that usually lasts a few minutes. There might be a little bit of bleeding, slight to moderate. With lip piercings, if they bleed, they bleed. If they don't bleed, they're usually, you don't even notice it. And if you do notice any, it has more to do with the thinness of the guide pin because it's tapered than it does actually the piercing itself. Because we pierce with a needle, it's the same size as the jewelry. A lot of times, if you see an excessive amount of bleeding, it probably means the piercer used a needle that's too big. Like, for example, piercing a lip with a 14-gauge needle and putting a 16-gauge piece of jewelry in there. That gap is there, and your body's going to need to bleed and clot and everything else to kind of seal it up again. If it's the same thickness as the jewelry, usually you don't have as much bleeding. Of course, the piercing is going to be sensitive to touch, and there's a reason for that. You shouldn't be touching it. Leave it alone. Leave it be. Rest it. As far as pain level on this one, most people say is between a 2 and a 4. I have noticed that some people have stated that the further you go in to the center, the more painful it seems to be, especially the closer you are to the lip. I'm sure that has something to do with all the nerve endings that we have and how they group inside and develop inside your lip. Since this doesn't go directly, especially the straight-in vertical, or not vertical, horizontal Labret stud style, usually these don't hurt as much as the ones that go more vertically and through that lip tissue. Now, of course, anybody that's had multiple piercings done on the same day knows that the second one, the third one, the fourth one, the fifth one, all kind of increase slightly in the pain level. Part of this is just basically your body warning you that you've done something that hurts and might be harmful, and then when you do it again, going, hey, I told you not to do that. So it'll kind of increase a little bit. Some people notice it, most people don't. You can live through it. That's the biggest thing I need to tell you is, regardless of what you think or what you expect or fear, it's probably not going to be as bad as you think it's going to be, especially if it's done by a well-experienced, talented piercer. Now let's talk about healing. Average healing time on these is anywhere from 2 to 4 months, during which time you're going to want to clean it twice a day using a sterile saline solution. I like Nelmed's Piercing Aftercare. You can also find the wound wash version. The main thing you want to look for is sterile. It's best to find it in a can or a pressurized can. And on the back, when you flip it around, it should only say water, as far as ingredients. Water and sodium chloride. Nothing else. Generally, what I suggest for all oral piercings is rinsing a couple times a day with Biotin antiseptic mouthwash. Some people notice dry mouth when they're healing piercings, and this helps a little bit with that. Also, rinsing with warm water and sea salt can help too, kind of take the edge off things and make it feel good. Swelling lasts anywhere from 3 to 5 days. You can cut down the amount of swelling you see by cutting down all the things I talked about earlier. Also, soft foods, simple diet for roughly about 5 to 7 days. Cold items. Cold items are your best friend during the healing of any piercing that is in your mouth. Also, gently sucking on ice chips for the first 24 to 28 hours. And drinking lots of cold liquids, especially throughout the night when you dehydrate. You usually see the worst of the swelling when you wake up in the morning, and that's most likely, commonly, I guess probably, it's caused by dehydration that happens at night. A couple other things you can do is sleep with your head above your heart. That'll help reduce the blood flow to the area and reduce the swelling. And limit the movement, contact, and etc. with the jewelry in the piercing. Change your diet and how you drink to avoid contact with the piercing during the healing process. Like I mentioned earlier, kind of plan ahead of not using the side that you're getting pierced. Straws are great for this, and various sippy cups and all kinds of stuff, and spooning things in and etc. Now, you want to practice cross-contamination prevention. That's going to that's common sense stuff Mom taught you. Wash your hands before you handle it. No oral contact. No exchanging of bodily fluids on, near, around the piercing for a minimum of, until it's healed. I also keep in mind that you are more acceptable to STDs or oral sex. So if you switch partners, practice safe sex the way you're supposed to. Keep your environment clean. Clothing, bedding, towels, anything that may come in contact with it on a regular basis, make sure that it is cleaned properly. Also, do not submerge the piercing in bodies of water you can't control the quality of, which is pretty much everything but your own clean bathtub. Keep pets away from it. Don't let them sleep in the bed with you, especially the smaller animals like to sleep up by your face. Make sure that you keep utensils clean. Your own especially, but also do not share food items or utensils with other people. Now, for the first 3 to 5 days, you might notice a little bit of slight bleeding off and on. Also, redness, discolorization, heat, tenderness to the touch. This is normal reactions to the trauma of the piercing in your body saying, stay away from me so I can get my work done. Now, basically, usually you don't see a lot of bleeding. One thing that's strange with these that people kind of freak out about is it's not uncommon to see the kind of this yellowy stringy stuff hang off the jewelry on the inside. That's limp discharge. It's like the stuff that crusts on the outside because it's in your mouth. It's warm and moist. It can't harden, so it forms these long strings. Just leave them alone. They'll come off when you rinse. And I don't know why I wrote this down so many times, but it's in here 3 times. Just don't play with it. Avoid trauma. Avoid contact. Downsize the jewelry, usually about 4 to 6 weeks, especially if it's excessively long. Now let's move on to jewelry. Leave the jewelry in at all times. You should only take it out to replace it. Oral piercings are known to close quickly. If you're a piercer with a stud and you'd like to try out a ring, I would suggest waiting a minimum of 6 months before trying the ring. We are changing from a straight jewelry to a curved jewelry. It can affect it, cause bumps, all kinds of problems, even in a healed piercing. Give it time to strengthen and grow additional tissue. And if you see any problems when you put the ring in, go right back to the stud. Don't try to wait it out. It's probably not going to improve. Put the stud back in, give it more time, and eventually you'll probably be able to wear that ring in there. With threaded jewelry, check the tightness of the balls on a regular basis. Pick a day of the week, and that's ball checking day. Do it every week. They can come unscrewed, especially in areas of the body that have a lot of contact. If you can imagine, your lip comes in contact with stuff a lot. Your face comes in contact with stuff a lot. So it's likely that it's going to rub against it and possibly loosen it up. The jewelry falls out, and you got all kinds of problems. Now, as far as jewelry, you should avoid things that have sharp edges, points, especially inside your mouth. It should be limited as much as possible. Avoiding contact with teeth, gums, etc. Sharp objects, pointed objects are going to be a problem. You may not have a problem if you're sticking with the stud style jewelry and go with those little cone things or spikes that I don't know about other piercers, but I absolutely hate putting on. They should be fine. If the jewelry is loose-fitting, you should probably change to something shorter. Leaving that longer jewelry in there is just going to increase the amount of knocking around that it does and be more prone to problems. If you have a reason or something comes up and you have to remove the jewelry for short periods of time for medical reasons or what have you, you can wear glass jewelry in this temporarily. I wouldn't suggest as a long-term solution because most of them, the only closure you have is that O-ring, and those come off fairly easy. Now let's move on to living with the piercing. Ends checked on a regular basis. Continue to avoid contact and stress on the jewelry and the piercings. A lot of people have this misconception, it's healed, I can do whatever I want. Constant contact, abuse, etc. will cause issues even in a healed piercing. Leave the jewelry in at all times, as I repeat myself again. During oral sex, practice safe sex the way you're supposed to when you switch partners until you've both been tested and cleared, just to be safe and healthy. Sometimes brushing the jewelry or using an anti-plaque rinse will reduce the buildup of plaque. This is common sometimes on Labret studs, usually not so much on rings, but just regularly check them, and that should be enough to get rid of that problem. Lastly, let's talk about abandoning the piercing. If the piercing is still healing and there are any signs of infection or other problem, consult your doctor or your piercer before removing the jewelry. The reason why we want you to do this is the possibility that an infection could be deep inside the piercing. You remove the jewelry, keeping the two holes open. They seal shut, trapping that infected tissue and fluids inside your body, creating an abscess or a cyst, which is going to require medical attention. For those that don't know, your body will isolate the infected tissue and fluids and then slowly push it to the surface, usually through the wound. If there's not an opening in the wound, then it'll seal it up and then slowly push it out, painfully so. If the piercing is healing but it's perfectly healthy, removing the jewelry will only cause the piercing to close. Usually it'll take a day or two for it to completely close on both sides. Keep an eye on it, treat it like you would any other open wound. Just give it time. It'll close. If there's any signs of infection or other problem, consult a medical professional. If it's healed piercing and you've had it for 20 years or whatever, if you take the jewelry out, it will slowly begin to close, usually reconnecting in the center and closing on the inside first, and then slowly filling the hole up. They can appear open for a very long time, even after they've been abandoned. Don't be surprised about this. I talked about scarring earlier. It's pretty common. Sometimes with old abandoned piercings, you'll see this white creamy substance, cream cheese kind of looking stuff, has a distinct odor to it, that if you squeeze it, it comes out. This is not a sign of infection or anything else. It's just a buildup of sebum. It is a oil, waxy oil that your body produces. It's completely normal, completely healthy. It tends to produce more of this around scar tissue, probably to moisturize it. Just leave it alone, clean it with warm water and soap. You're perfectly fine. Well, that's all I have to say today about spider bite piercings. Hope you found it informative. Hope you found it enjoyable. Till next time, here's hoping all your piercings heal with ease and without a single issue. And if you're in the Des Moines, Iowa area, I hope to see you for your body piercing needs in the future. Have a good day, everybody. Take care, and we'll see you in the next video. Maybe one of these.